Good morning everyone, and welcome back to the unusual lithography techniques. What I'm going to be doing now is, I've got in front of me, it's actually an old Mokulito plate, that's the back, that's the original one. And I've got the back of it here, and some cotton, which we've been working on in the cloth lithography. Range of lithographic tools, some unusual tools which we'll be going through. And I'm going to now run through the process of making a sort of, hopefully, it's a mixed media, unusual lithography piece, print. I'm going to be using that, as I say, back of a Mokulito plate. So there are a few marks here, so I can't necessarily guarantee this is going to be a perfect Mokulito print, but I don't like the wastage. In theory, you should be able to use the back. So I've sanded that, gone through the grade of sandpaper to remove as much of the grease as I can, and my cotton cloth. Now, because it's apple season, we've been picking kilos and kilos of wild apples. I'm actually going to start creating an apple still life, and this isn't, I'm not professing to be a still life expert, it's a very good way of actually me introducing how to combine layering with the cloth and the wooden lithography, and we'll throw in some other techniques. So we're doing another hybrid print with the cloth and Mokulito as the basis, the grounding of the print. So I'm going to start straight away. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the wooden plate. I'm going to cut this apple in half, and I'm going to use that half. I'm just going to try a bit as well, because actually these are really nice apples from our allotment. Good. Okay. Sorry, it just had to be done. So I'm going to actually print with that to create, see what happens. And again, I'm learning as well. See what happens if I ink this up, print it, and see what marks we get. I'm going to do it on the Mokulito because it is slightly more stable than the cloth. So we'll see what happens. What I'm going to do first of all is just go and pat off the residual moisture. And this is just with nothing special, just one of my clean cotton rags. Just wiping off any residual moisture. And this is vegetable printing, as in stamping. I've got here, this is, it's called Roll Up Black. It's a non-drying lithographic ink. So it's very greasy. And it's used in stone and other traditional lithographic techniques. And it's also useful for creating an impression. You could also, I would imagine, use straight up oil-based printing ink. Remember, it has to be oil-based. But the reason I'm using the non-drying is because I know from working with stone and zinc plate lithography, it actually creates a very nice imprint. It is non-drying though, so if you do use this stuff, clean up your roller straight away. And I'm going to literally ink the apple. Bear in mind I'm making this film with two young children who are currently entertained next door. So they might come through at any point and sort of just come through and interrupt the filming. Now, because the apple is still wet, it's not going to take the ink very well. It's taking the edges of it are taking, which is good. So in fact, instead of using, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch and do the apple leaves with the non-drying ink. So I'm using those. And because there's still a lot of residual moisture in the apple, I'm going to use the touche for that. So there's... And this is, again, I'm just trying to see how much detail, because if I do a leaf print ordinarily, just to exist as a print itself, under the press, it produces a very fine detailed print. To the other side. Obviously when working with the Mokulito and the cloth, you're working with the texture of the surface, so we'll see what happens. Just grabbing myself some scraps of tissue. Now I'm going to go with the grain on this, so it will pick it up more easily. Just laid it down ink side straight onto the plywood, piece of tissue, just literally because it's non-drying ink and it gets everywhere. And I'm going to just push with my fingers, have a little peek. Nice. And the trick with leaf prints, I had a peek there, is try not to peek too much because obviously you're working with an undulation of a leaf, so every time you lift it and put it down it settles in a different place. I think we've got most of it. Beautiful. So that one can go off shot. I am going to do my apple, don't worry, I haven't forgotten, having started so enthusiastically about my apples. It's purely because I wanted the pleasure of cutting it open and eating some on camera. I will get to that. And what I'm going to be doing with all these pieces, and this will be off camera because it's pretty boring to watch, is I'm going to be sawing these up into individual elements. Lovely. And I'm going to do the third one. Oh, sorry, that's not the inked one there. So that's the top side of the leaf. And I will do some of these on the cloth as well, just so we can have a comparison. So yes, as I say, I will be cutting these out with a little fret saw into individual jigsaw parts, so I can use them, lovely, quite sort of fluidly across the printing plate. Now, this is my touche. I'm going to paint my apple with that, and that should pick up the surface better because it will mix more readily with the moisture on the apple. So I'm literally just painting my apple. There's no rhyme or reason to this. And I'm hoping it will give a nice black apple shape outline. That is my plan. Depends how straight I cut, of course. I do like a good vegetable print, I have to say. Lovely. It's just nice, it's a lovely bold graphic, and obviously in theory that's going to ink up completely black. What I might do is take a secondary print or a ghost print straight away, and that might give us something to work into manually, sort of with hand-drawn tools afterwards. Oh, lovely, look at that, look at the textures coming through. So apple is going to go to one side. I'm just going to let that dry a bit, and we're going to switch to the cloth. Pop that there. Again, you can see this is literally an old piece of cloth. There is nothing special about it. So again, I'm just going to paint. I'm going to do similar effects, similar leaf prints and apple prints on both the cloth and the Mokulito. So we have lots to work with. It's always good to give yourself lots to work with in printmaking, because not everything will turn out as you wish, and then you can't really go backwards, especially when doing a hybrid print. When you're in the flow of mixing media and expressing yourself, the last thing what you want to have to do is to stop midway and think, oh, I forgot to make an extra leaf or something. Speaking of leaves, get this out again. Been doing a lot of leaf prints recently. Again, this is all going to get cut up, so I'm just kind of jiggling around. I'm not creating my still life now, you can see. What we're doing is we're creating a series of elements, which in the next video I will be printing and combining and cutting up and jigsawing together to create the image we wish. Lovely. Be interesting to see how these turn out, because obviously the cloth lithography, I'm just going back to grab another leaf now, the cloth lithography is a little bit more fickle, so we'll see. Now there's a lot of things online about Mokulito, and it's something that was brought up, a question for me actually, a while back, about sort of, there's a lot of stuff in Mokulito at the moment about using silicons and and sealants and things like this to create quite a, on your surface of your plate, to create quite a detailed mark. And the reason I just use the basic gum arabic etch and the plywood, because I'm trying to reduce my impact on the environment as much as possible. It's really important right now. You know, the world is in a perilous balance. And if I'm just using natural gum arabic from the acacia tree, you know, it's a natural product. Okay, plywood isn't ideal, and that's why I'm looking into using end grain and solid woods as opposed to the glued ply. It does, it's just literally these marks and the gums, so I'm not having to add any plastic based glues or silicons or sealants or anything like that just for the sake of creating different marks. I'm trying to just see what we can do with the least impact on our planet as possible. I've got here the lithographic crayon. I'm just going to manually add a few details to some of these. Though I'm quite liking this. Actually, I'm going to change from that to a square base. So this is another litho crayon, the square ones. I'm just going to add a sort of a very subtle black lines, just to give it a bit more texture. This one as well, that's rather beautiful, so I'm not going to do anything to those two. I'm going to draw an apple instead. Heaven forbid I'm actually going to draw something. I do quite a bit of drawing, really, secretly, at night time when no one's watching. As I say, I'm doing this not to create a masterpiece, but to kind of demonstrate what can be done. So I'm trying to add a bit of texture because I know what's happening down the line. I'm going to roll with that. It's a rather funky apple, I'm kind of quite enjoying that. And this one I'm going to add a nice big, very satisfying circle around. I'm going to go in, I've got some water here in this jar, and I'm going to do this on the cloth and the Mokulito. I'm just going to fill in this gap down here. I'm going to add the shape of a very small apple. You might be able to catch it in the light on the camera. Just in water, and I'm going to bleed the touche into it. It's a bit like, you know, when if you've ever created an outline with water on watercolour paper and then you bled watercolour into it, and kind of emulating that. Like those big bruised apples you get this time of year, all those windfall, then add a nice big blob there. Okay, I'm going to let that lie that flat and let that do its thing. And I'm going to do the same in this one. So it's nigh on impossible for the camera to pick up where the water is here. Now, it might do because it's kind of seeped through to the plastic, so it's a little bit transparent. So you see I'm making as many apples as is possible. Going apple-tastic. And don't forget, with things like the cloth particularly, where you actually cut the cloth, and as I say I'm going to be cutting all these elements out, that will add a texture, a surface, as we found, because you can fray the edges. So all these things you utilise as part of your mark making. It's really important that it's used. Great, okay. Now what I'm going to do in this tiny patch down here, I'm just going to move this one off shot a bit, give me a bit of space. I can't move this too much because it's got the water underneath, but I only need this patch. I'm going to add, I'm actually going to use this almost like a tablecloth, but I'm going to add some pattern now to my lovely cloth. which I'll be cutting up, and I will literally be sort of utilising the folds of the cloth to emulate fabric. I'll be printing as is, but I'm going to add some lovely drawn marks to the cloth. Now you need a little section, because don't forget, obviously these can all be printed more than once, so though I've only got house 7 apples, in theory they can be printed 1, 2, 3 times under the press. It's literally a bit of freeform patterning, just to add some variance in my fabric. I'm just being careful to avoid the bleed of this, which is actually looking rather spectacular. Okay, one last bit and then we're done for that. I'm going to so that is that for now, for this stage. I'm going to let all this dry, then I'm going to towel cut and etch it as in the previous videos, and then we'll be back to print. So I'm going to leave that, towel cut, etch it and leave it for a few days. Then I'm going to cut it up and we'll be able to print it.